Richard Fairchild, a self-made millionaire, was proud of his empire but deeply concerned about his spoiled daughter, Isabella. She had grown up in the lap of luxury, blind to the struggles and efforts that had brought him success. Despite all his efforts to instill a sense of responsibility, Isabella refused to work, spending her days indulging in shopping sprees and extravagant vacations. Richard, at his wits' end, devised a drastic plan. He would send her to live on a remote farm as punishment, to learn the value of hard work. Little did he know that this decision would spark a transformation far beyond anything he could have imagined. Isabella Fairchild had always lived a life of privilege. She had never known the meaning of the word no. From a young age, her father had provided her with everything she desired, from designer clothes to expensive cars, hoping that with time, she would learn to appreciate the finer things by understanding their cost. But that moment never came. Richard, the founder of a global tech company, had risen from humble beginnings. His wealth was built on hard work, persistence, and sacrifice, and he had always hoped his only daughter would follow in his footsteps. But Isabella, now in her early 20s, showed no signs of responsibility. She skipped college classes, relied on her father's fortune, and partied through the night without a care in the world. Richard, tired of her carefree attitude, tried to make her take on more serious roles, like managing a small project in his company, but she scoffed at the idea of working and brushed it off as unnecessary. Her rebellion reached a breaking point one evening when she dismissed his concerns, stating, "Why should I work? I'm rich." That was the final straw. Determined to teach her a lesson, Richard decided to send Isabella to live on an isolated farm owned by his old friend, David, in the rural countryside. She would stay there for 3 months, without any luxuries, and be forced to engage in daily farm work. He thought it would break her stubbornness and help her realize the importance of labor, discipline, and humility. When Isabella first arrived at the farm, she was horrified. The farm was miles away from any city, with no cell phone signal, no high-end amenities, and the nearest store over an hour away by car. She was greeted by David, a rugged, middle-aged man with a no-nonsense attitude. His wife, Mary, was kind but firm, and their teenage son, Jack, barely said a word. The farmhouse was small, with modest furnishings, and Isabella was shown to her room, simple, with no television, no internet, and a bed that squeaked with every movement. Isabella immediately rebelled. She refused to help with chores, threw tantrums, and demanded to be taken home. David, however, would not budge. "Your father said you're here for 3 months, and that's exactly how long you'll stay," he told her. The first week was a nightmare. Isabella sulked, isolated herself in her room, and refused to eat the plain meals served at the farmhouse. She missed her extravagant life, the parties, the lavish dinners, and the designer clothes. Her hands remained clean as she watched the family toil away, waking up at dawn to tend to the animals and work the fields. But David and Mary were patient. They didn't try to force her into the work immediately. Instead, they let her observe the natural rhythm of the farm. Days turned into a blur of activity, and despite her reluctance, Isabella couldn't help but notice how hard the family worked, how the chickens had to be fed, the cows milked, and the crops watered. She began to feel an unfamiliar sense of discomfort. She realized these people were content, even happy, with their lives despite the absence of luxury. By the second week, Isabella's stubbornness began to crack. It started with small things. she offered to help Mary with dishes one evening and to bring water to Jack as he worked the fields. Her hands, once soft and manicured, became rough as she slowly integrated herself into the daily routine of the farm. Her muscles ached, and her body protested the physical labor, but there was something unexpectedly satisfying about completing a hard day's work. Isabella began to bond with the family. She learned that Jack, who had initially seemed cold and aloof, was shy but kind-hearted. He showed her how to milk a cow and ride a tractor, and they slowly developed an unlikely friendship. Mary, who reminded her of the mother she had lost years ago, taught her how to cook from scratch, how to knead bread, and how to appreciate the simplicity of homegrown food. David became a father figure in ways that Richard never had time to be, offering quiet wisdom as they worked side by side. As the days passed, Isabella found herself changing. She began to appreciate the value of small tasks, the beauty of a sunrise over the fields, and the satisfaction of harvesting a crop that she had helped grow. The farm, once a punishment, had become a place of reflection and growth. As the 3 months drew to a close, Richard Fairchild decided to visit his daughter. He expected to find her miserable and pleading to return to her old life. Instead, when he arrived at the farm, he was stunned by what he found. Isabella, once impeccably dressed and always glued to her phone, was now in overalls and boots, her hands dirty from working in the garden. Her face, once filled with disdain, now carried a peaceful expression. She greeted him with a hug, something she hadn't done in years. Richard was speechless as he watched her move around the farm with ease, helping David and Mary with their chores and laughing with Jack as they finished a task. At dinner that night, Richard saw a side of his daughter he had never known. She spoke of the farm with genuine fondness and pride, recounting stories of the lessons she had learned. She no longer cared about her old lifestyle, and when Richard offered to take her home early, she declined. "I want to stay until the end of the season," she said. "I've made a commitment here." Richard was both relieved and confused by his daughter's transformation. However, as the night went on, he noticed tension in the air. David and Mary seemed distant, their smiles forced. Jack, who had been friendly earlier, avoided eye contact. When Richard confronted Isabella about it, she hesitated before revealing the truth. The farm was in trouble. David and Mary had been struggling financially for years, barely making ends meet. A recent storm had destroyed much of their crops, and the repairs to the barn had drained their savings. They had never mentioned it to Isabella, not wanting to burden her, but she had recently found out. The farm was at risk of being sold, and without it, they would lose everything. Richard was taken aback. He had come here to check on his daughter, but now he realized that the people who had helped her grow were in desperate need. He knew he could help them financially, but he also knew that offering money could feel like an insult to their pride. In the weeks that followed, Richard worked with Isabella to come up with a plan. Instead of offering a handout, they proposed a partnership. Richard would invest in the farm, helping them rebuild and expand, while Isabella would take on a role in managing the farm's operations and marketing. She had discovered a passion for sustainable farming and wanted to use her skills to turn the farm into a profitable, eco-friendly business. David and Mary were reluctant at first, but with gentle persuasion, they agreed. Over the next year, the farm underwent a transformation. With Richard's investment and Isabella's leadership, they expanded into organic produce, opened a farm-to-table restaurant, and began offering ecotourism experiences. Isabella had found her purpose, and for the first time in her life, she worked not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Richard Fairchild had sent his spoiled daughter to a farm as punishment, hoping to teach her a lesson in responsibility. But what he hadn't expected was the profound change that would take place, not just in Isabella, but in himself. Through the farm, they both learned the value of hard work, family, and community. Isabella, once a symbol of privilege and excess, had become a woman of substance and integrity. The farm had not only saved her but had also given her a new path in life. And as Richard watched his daughter thrive in her new role, he realized that sometimes, the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. The seeds of change had been planted, and they had grown into something far more valuable than wealth, growth, love, and purpose. The end.